First of all, we are having the first operator on to join us on the stage. It is Ryan Tollofson, Director of Emerging Communication and Strategic Marketing at Telus. So joining us from Canada. Come here. So Debbie from Verizon was supposed to be our first of the operator speakers. You now got officially the role of breaking in and tell us what's in the mind of a mobile operator and in communication as well. Ryan, your 15 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, Canada is taking over clearly because we're the first operator to present today. How many operators are actually in the room? 1, 2, not many. Okay. And so how many people know Telus, first of all? Okay, that's pretty good. Okay. So let's begin. So I'm going to I have some slides, but I'm mostly going to tell you about my own story of understanding the space, because my background, I'm going to skip that, my background. So I am a networking engineer, computer scientist originally, that decided to become a business guy and sell and produce and market software. I returned to telco about last January, so I'm relatively new compared to most of the people in this room to messaging. But it works out because I am with the FCC. It's an information service and it's an app, right? So I think the goal of the modern carrier is to figure out how to support an application on its network in a way that both is going to manage the brand experience, the customer experience, and monetize it and provide value across the entire chain. At Telus, I work in the wholesale division called Partner Solutions. So I actually have both the voice side, so all the SIP trunking, all that stir-shaking stuff, as well as A2P and all the commercial messaging side, as well as that thing called toll-free, which I'm sure you use all the time. Click. So it seems like Telus is pretty well known, but I will just say, we have 1/3 of the market share in Canada. Certainly a good solid brand. What I would say makes us unique relative to other Canadian carriers is our focus on health, as well as agriculture. That's not on the slide, but where other carriers in Canada focused on content and media, we focused on the verticals that have the best demographics for the future, which is health and agriculture. The other element is we really devote a lot of our brand, as well as our profit, to triple bottom line and corporate social responsibility. This is part that differentiates us in the space, and we're quite proud of that contribution. So first of all, I won't go through all these bullets, but I will suffice to say that SMS is not dead. So messaging is not dead. You can see both the CAGR and the trend. It's definitely a growing business, projected to be over a $3 billion business for Canada. And you can see that consumers, provided that we manage the experience right, are willing to use messaging. And I'm going to share that I think this is really important for us to make a call to arms, because as an operator, I've been struggling to monetize this service, and I've been struggling to figure out how to do it. Should it be RCS? Should it be MMS? Should we stay with SMS? And I think that there is a lot of discussion happening, and I really appreciate Dario and the MEF making space for that conversation, but the window is closing. And I think others here will say that OTT is eating our lunch. The consumers can't tell the difference between WhatsApp, really, and SMS. I mean, in terms of the clients, they just want to be able to communicate with their brands, communicate with their influencers, communicate with their colleagues and friends easily, and preferably from less than 5 apps. So regulatory, I am not an expert in regulatory. You might want to turn all questions to Caitlin in the back from the CWTA for any of the regulatory questions. But I wanted to touch on this fact that it's pretty different in Canada. I will say lighter touch, very focused on short codes. That is the space that the majority of the regulatory conversation has been happening within A2P. But I will say that at Telus, we want that to shift. And the main reason I would say that is because 10DLC attaches yourself to a phone number. And those phone numbers are still one of the unique intellectual properties of the telecommunications industry. It represents a person, represents a business, and if we don't make sure those numbers are still valued, and if we don't make sure those numbers have credibility and weight, then we will be shut out. And so the reason I care about MMS and HP and 10DLC is because I want the phone number to have longevity. And I think that also relates to my voice business. We also need Start Shaken. We definitely need to have some kind of verification within messaging, what that ecosystem will look like or how it will unfold. Not fully clear yet, as we've been discussing, but it is clear to me that the number needs to mean something. And so Telus is participating within the CWTA and the MCC, as well as the MEF, to be able to ensure that we do our part to make sure that telephone numbers have longevity. Just interestingly enough, we do have, which is pretty different from the US, Castle. So Castle is, in the email world here, CAN spam, but Castle speaks to both electronic messages of SMS as well as email. So we're under the same umbrella for those two, which is a pretty different space. And for that reason, we really don't have the same level of regulatory intervention within the space of messaging yet. I don't think it's likely. Certainly there's a huge push for intervention within Start Shaken and voice calls and robocalling. But where those two will meet messaging, that's not clear yet. So over the last 2 years as I've gone into the space, I would say previously, and I'm not sure if it's possible that others who were at Telus previous who were here in the room today, but I would say that A2P overall was on opportunistic autopilot. And I think the growth opportunity for A2P has not been fully tapped into yet because it takes a lot of collaboration. It takes a lot of work to be able to monitor for fraud. But the first question that I had to tackle with is, what's a good aggregator? And how many do you need? How many do you want? And I don't have the answer to this question yet. I'm still trying to figure it out. I just know I don't need 20. And I also would prefer one-hop aggregators. But I mean, trying to figure out how to manage the aggregator ecosystem and really starts with understanding what brands they represent, understanding how they manage their own brand management, traffic quality, as well as whether or not they have flexibility of choice. I mean, ultimately, I think as a marketer, our consumers, our customers, they want choice. So they don't necessarily want to be locked into short codes. They don't want to be necessarily locked into 10DLC, and they may want to use toll-free. So the strategy that we're deploying at Telus is to try to build our own self-governed and ability and technical operational ability to connect across all those channels. So as I was saying, our priorities for 2023, one is to build new A2P relationships. It's also the diversification of that traffic, moving it out of just one-way conversations, building MMS capability, building RCS capability, which I'll get to in the next slide, and ultimately being able to support 10DLC. RCS. So that was the number one thing in the middle of that word cloud. I have been trying to get RCS off the ground at Telus for about 18 months. And we have RCS for P2P. Since 2015, we were one of the first, I think, if not the first carrier in Canada to be able to sign with Google for P2P RCS. But commercial RCS has been elusive because it's in flux. I think the job contract has changed 3 times since I've been trying to sign it. And how we're going to commercialize it is still underway. And ultimately, I have to agree with my peer at Twilio that without Android, without iOS, it's a very difficult it's a difficult place to put all your eggs in. I think that's the issue. So really what we are doing, we're continuing with RCS because I think Android is a huge part of our base. I think the Android's not going away. Certainly it helped internationally, it's dominant. I think the features of RCS are very valuable and huge, so we are going to support RCS, but I don't think it can be the only rich media communication channel we support in this space. And I'm excited about hearing more about what we can do with MMS. I think that multiple vendors have been talking to me and my team about what they can do with MMS and branded messaging. And I think that we should be able to support all of those channels in our ecosystem. The last element I have is really about fraud. So for the most part, we can see spam trending upwards. We do have our own monitoring and ability to control spam with partners. But we don't get a lot of complaints. And I think this is the interesting part, because I was really expecting to find a lot more complaints about spam. And when you dive into it, I can't really get a conclusive answer on why our consumers aren't complaining about spam. And I think it's mainly because, oh, this is what you get with SMS, and I'll move over to OTT. Like, I think the impact to spam might not be complaints. It might be substitution. And so it's definitely an important problem for us to sort out, and we take very seriously. And we are investing more money and time into figuring out spam with our own system, our own network, and our partners, and also working with our aggregators to ensure that they are doing their part as well. And that's a relatively new conversation for Telus. Back to what makes a good aggregator. Well, I think the fact that they are trying to manage their brands and make sure that we don't get fraud into our network to begin with is a starting point. I think that's all I have. I also speak pretty fast, sorry.
Well, thank you, Ryan. We would like to have a few questions, and I might start first, if you don't mind. But raise your hands if you want to be booked the next one. One thing that we saw there was your priorities for 2023, and the third one caught my eye because you were showing self-regulation, regulations. How you getting to do that in yourself, maybe in Canada as a whole. How are you looking at long code and toll-free right now for self-regulation?
Well, the reason I indicated self-regulation is only because I think we need to move commercially. I mean, one of the things, and I didn't mention this earlier, is Telus overall has a commercial orientation versus a regulatory one in this space. So I think that we want to be able to move forward commercially. I think having standards and having an ecosystem that supports each other with those standards, whether that's regulation or just standards, I think is advantageous. But we want to be able to move forward with 10DLC before we have those standards. The CWT is trying to figure them out, and we're going to support them through that journey. But until then, we are going to develop our own policies with respect to fraud management, brand management, vetting, and the ability to manage it. I mean, it's less of an issue in ATP, frankly, for us than DCB. I think that DCB, which we'll talk a little bit in the afternoon, has a lot more challenges with respect to fraud than ATP, but it doesn't mean that we don't want to put forward policy on how to manage it. And I don't have a specific answer for you on the how yet, except that we're willing to trek our own way.
Fantastic. We got questions from anybody? Well, we got one over there. I think Carlos is next.
Yeah, I have a question. Earlier, Twelio talked about MMS as what I understood of it as MMS plus SMS being a light alternative to RCS, having the benefit of being ubiquitous across markets, iOS, Android. I wanted to have your view in Telus. Do you see MMS, and is it already happening? Do you confirm that this is a possibility to offer the same commercial value than RCS, or maybe not the same, but close enough? Immediately or not so much?
Well, it's a good question. First of all, MMS is not something that we have yet driven commercial focus on the way to show a trend uplift. So MMS is still pretty nascent because we haven't. I mean, one of the comments that I forget who asked it earlier is why are the aggregators and the brands they represent not demanding RCS campaigns? And they're not. I mean, I haven't had very few aggregators come to me and say, I have 5 brands that need to send an RCS campaign. I think they might not even know about MMS as a campaign option yet. And I think that education piece, because I think as someone who has managed a lot of marketing budget in the past, you can't, spending $1 of marketing, of digital advertising that does not hit your entire base is just not something that's very feasible. So I think there's always going to be a specialized campaign where RCS is going to work, because RCS definitely is more feature rich. You can hold a whole conversation, you can manage, you can introduce bots. You'll never be able to do that with MMS, at least not that I'm aware of. And I think that is a type of campaign that will demand premium advertising dollars in the future. But it's not ubiquitous, and we can't start with that. Or at least we can't start only with that. So I think MMS has promise. I can't really speak to the specifics of how yet, because I haven't been educated enough on it, except that I think adding a brand and adding credibility, which I think MMS can do, being able to add a conversation, which I think MMS can do, are good starting points.
Fantastic. We only have the last 40 seconds as ever, but you get a fantastic brief questions, or you give a last word. Where do we go? Last words? what would you suggest the group to actually look and do next?
I mean, I'll give a last word since I'm given the opportunity, and that rarely happens in my household. So what I will say is we really need to pick a horse or a select small number of horses, and we need to ride the horse immediately because consumers aren't waiting. WhatsApp's not waiting. So I'm just a call to arms. We need to figure out what direction we're going in and how. And MEF can help.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that.